Hello everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to What is China for the Left? A panel discussion hosted by Platypus Affiliated Society. The Platypus Affiliated Society, established in December of 2006, organizes reading groups, public fora, research, and journalism focused on problems and tasks inherited from the old 1920s to 30s, new 1960s to 70s, and post-political 1980s to 90s left, for the possibilities of emancipatory politics today. Today we have 4 speakers. I will read their bios in order of their speaking order. Iosbaker is the Chicago district organizer for the Freedom Road Socialist organization. He joined the student organization of the Revolutionary Communist Party in 1977. After the RCP split over Bob Avakian's ultra-left line, he was sent on a delegation to China in 1978 to re-establish relations with the CPC. Iosbaker was subsequently a founding member of FRSO in 1985 and is currently on the steering committee of the Coalition Against the Trump Agenda. Next, we have Jerry Harris. Jerry Harris has written on China for a number of left journals. He has been an invited speaker at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Tsinghua University, Renmin University, and Shandong University. He is also National Secretary of the Global Studies Association of North America. Next, we have Yueran Zhang. He teaches political economy, labor movements, and histories of socialism and capitalism in the Sociology department at the University of Chicago. Born and raised in China, he has been involved in leftist and labor organizing for more than a decade on both sides of the Pacific. And finally, Devin Thompson is a supporter of the Spartacist League, U.S. section of the International Communist League, Fourth Internationalists. So first, we will have a number of opening remarks from each of the speakers, which will last 10 to 12 minutes. Then each speaker will get 4 minutes to respond to each other, and then we will open it up for questions to the audience. Maybe first, please give a warm welcome to all of our speakers today for this panel. I will now read the prompt. Here is our prompt for the panel. Is China proof a socialist revolution could take place without the proletariat? Is it appropriate to say that Maoism overcame Stalinism? Is China Maoist today? Did Deng Xiaoping betray the Chinese Revolution? If so, how? What lessons should we draw from the 75 years legacy of the Chinese Revolution and from a century of Marxism in China? Why, if at all, are such lessons relevant for the left today? We will now start with Mr. Iosbaker.
Thank you. And can you just clarify, how many minutes do I have for opening remarks?
12, maximum.
I can have, okay, well I won't use that. I don't think I'll use that many. Anyway, ni hao ma. I'm so glad to be here. And you know, very excited to have this discussion. But I'm actually going to take liberties with my opening comments because I want to use something that we've learned from the Chinese Revolution. One of the practices, for those of you who are students of Chinese history and politics, or if you're Chinese yourself, one of the practices that the Communist Party of China developed in its history, it took the Leninist concept of criticism and self-criticism and greatly expanded it. In fact, it's known now around the world in revolutionary movements, this practice of criticism and self-criticism in order for the party and for the movement to be able to, you know, learn the lessons from mistakes. So I'm going to, and by the way, in this country, criticism and self-criticism was introduced during the period of the 1960s, in the period of what was called the Cultural Revolution in China. And it really caught on. I mean, the Students for a Democratic Society, my old friend, I'm so glad to be on a panel with my old friend Jerry Harris, who's a veteran of the Students for a Democratic Society of that generation, the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, many of the young revolutionary organizations that emerged in that period adopted the Chinese communist practice of criticism and self-criticism. Freedom Road continues to view it as as an invaluable, tool in our toolbox for making revolution in this country. And so I'm going to open with a criticism of platypus. And here it is. So I have to give a little background on myself. 15 years ago, September of 2010, my home was raided by the FBI. I was getting ready for work at the University of Illinois. I was a clerical worker, an administrative worker. At 7 o'clock in the morning, knock on the door, I come downstairs, pulling my pants on, and there are a bunch of people in kind of office casual standing in my front porch. And I open the door, and the man in front flashes his big FBI badge and hands me a warrant to search my home. And on that warrant, it said that myself and my wife were under investigation for, quote, providing material support to foreign terrorist organizations. In particular, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. In the next 20 minutes, 15 FBI agents came into my house and proceeded to spread out and search my home. At noon, actually, some of them knocked off and 9 more FBI agents came over. So in the course of a 12-hour day, my home was searched by 25 FBI agents. They were all armed. They had their little, shoulder holsters with their pistols underneath their jackets. And by the way, they also handed me a subpoena, my wife too, to appear before a federal grand jury investigating us for providing material support to foreign terrorist organizations. Now, I have to just tell you, I've never provided material support to a foreign terrorist organization. If you don't know, the United States keeps a long list of organizations that they consider terrorists. Political support to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine? Moral support to the revolutionaries in Colombia? Absolutely. But material support is illegal. And anybody who's been in the anti-war movement for more than a couple of months knows that. So we never did that. Anyway, I won't go into the whole rationale for why they did this attack on us. But that day, there were 70 FBI agents in the field at the same hour in 5 different cities, attacking leaders of the anti-war movement. Raiding homes, kicking in doors. I opened the door for them. They didn't have to kick it in. But and in some cases, drawing weapons on anti-war protesters. Eventually, 23 people, including 7 Palestinians, were subpoenaed to this federal grand jury. And by the way, the charges of providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization carries 15 years in prison. And it's a federal charge, so there is no time off for good behavior. If any of us had ever been convicted, if I had been convicted, I would still be in prison, because it was 15 years ago, and they date it from when the conviction would have happened. So now this was clearly a witch hunt. What was happening in the country was this movement that erupted on your campus and every other campus in this country last year, this movement in solidarity with Palestine. It was just being born in 2010. And the FBI, in hindsight, and the Department of Justice and Homeland Security, they were trying to nip it in the bud. So they cooked up this attack on us. It was such a clear witch hunt that every left group in the country, including our friends in the Spartacist League, condemned the attack on us. In fact, not just the left. The peace movement condemned the attack on us, and labor unions with members totaling over 1 million members passed resolutions in our defense and said, essentially, we were activists, not terrorists. There is only one organization in this country that took the side of the FBI, and that is the Spartacist League.
What?
Shortly after we were raided, the Spartacist publication, this publication,
That's platypus.
platypus. My bad, platypus, not Spartacus. I misspoke. Platypus, my bad. Platypus, Spartacus, it's like a nursery rhyme. Anyway, platypus attacked us. They published a piece, one of their leading members published a piece about a month after the FBI raids. And in that piece, they said, in fact, Freedom Road has been providing material support to foreign terrorist organizations. And therefore, we support the FBI raids. We support the Department of Justice case against them, and they should go to prison. As a result of this, by the way, we never actually went on trial. We built such a popular movement that they were never able to put us in front of a grand jury, let alone put us on trial. It did take 7 years, the next 7 years of my life, to stay out of prison. And they did end up deporting one prominent Palestinian activist here in Chicago. But eventually we were able to build enough popular support that they weren't able to do this. But then this very weird thing kept happening, that Platypus kept inviting me to speak at their events. And each time, depending on how I felt that day, I would be polite or I would be rude to say, I'm not doing it, and you know why. So I don't know if this generation of Platypus even remembers this or knows about it, but so anyway, I'm raising this because of this Chinese communist practice of criticism and self-criticism. When you receive a criticism, if you are a revolutionary, when you receive a criticism, what is your responsibility? Your responsibility is to hear it, and first and foremost, to seek the truth in it. And so that's what we're calling on Platypus to do, and that's my opening remarks.
Well, something I share with Joe is the FBI. My uncle was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list and underground for 4 years during the McCarthy period. But that's a story for another time. So I'm going to talk about China. So one of the emails I got, the title of the panel was, "What is China to the left?" I would say a question mark. That's what it is to the left. So I'm going to talk briefly about some of the internal stuff in China, some of their involvement in internationally in terms of their economics, and then make some conclusions about the Chinese Communist experience. So, the Communist Party of China is an organization with 95 million members and contains many points of views. One leading Chinese communist defines 6 major schools of thought, ranging from Maoism, many different types of Marxism, to neoliberalism within the Chinese Communist Party. He said that there are extremes from selfless, serve the people types of cadre to the most corrupt types interested in money and power. So China is not a paradise, party members aren't angels, and the class struggle continues in China. Now, inside China, some of the greatest accomplishments, one from 1980 to 2020, in only 40 years, they lifted 800 million people out of poverty, about 16 million a year. That represents the most rapid and extensive poverty reduction in human history. In terms of their advancing the means of production, solar, wind, batteries, EV, rare earth materials, China has a 70 to 90% domination across every major segment of clean tech in the world today. It invests 44% of the global total in renewable energy. It also has the highest use of coal in the world too. I'll get to this stuff in a little bit. Just a short quote from Keith Bradshaw, who's the New York Times correspondent living in China. China has already built enough solar panel factories to supply the entire world's needs. It's built enough auto factories to make cars sold in China, Europe, and the United States. Excuse my voice. China will have built in just 5 years as many petrochemical factories as all those now running in Europe, Japan, and South Korea. In fact, about 1/3 of all manufactured goods in the world come from China. And that's one reason they need global markets to consume both the capital and goods that they're producing. And I'll get into that here in just a second. But for all those incredible advances in China, what are the relations of production? Social relations of production. If you work in a Chinese factory or a Chinese office, your experience is very much like workers here in the United States or Europe. Chinese unions don't call strikes. Every strike in China has been a wildcat strike. And the role of Chinese unions are to mediate those strikes between the workers and the company, representing actually the interests of both, not just the workers. In terms of strike leaders, there's one or two things usually happens. Either they're co-opted and brought into the union, or they're arrested and spend some time in jail. Those are usually the two options. In terms of the culture of work, if you're working in an office, some of you probably know this, there's the famous 9-9-6 culture. Work at 9 in the morning to 9 at night, 6 days a week. It's 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. That's why there's so much burnout among Chinese youth today, and why so many Chinese youth are, as they say, laying flat because of the horrible working conditions and just the incredible stress that many of them are facing. But there have also been large increases in wages for millions of people in China. Chinese living standards have gone up and up and up since about 1980. Yet this is also balanced by the exploitation of about 250 million migrant workers who've come in from the rural countrysides into the factories in the urban centers, fueling the creation of Chinese billionaires and profits for foreign capitalists. So it's a mixed picture. Now, in terms of some of the foreign investments, because when you're producing that much, you need to export, obviously, right? And capital also. So Chinese corporations do profit from lower wages abroad. That's the first chart up there, okay, if you take a look at it. So what I did was took a look at the annual factory wage of Chinese workers, which is about $11,500 a year. At the bottom is the U.S. average factory wage at about $5,500 a year. And then you could see I took some countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, all of which have major Chinese investments in it. The second column, you can see what those wages are as a percent of Chinese wages, ranging from a low of about 13% in Nigeria to a height of about 70% in Brazil. So even with Brazil, there's about a 30% difference. So the Chinese corporations can be making pretty good profits here in terms of the wage differentials, right, between Chinese workers and workers throughout the global South. But if you look at the last column and compare the differences with the United States, you'll see it just leaps a light year ahead to incredible differences in terms of wage exploitation. If you look at the next one below that, let me get it here. So Chinese finance has gone where Western finance has refused to go, which is infrastructure. Western finance capital rarely invests in infrastructure in the global South. It takes too long to build, and the return profits are just too low and takes too long. But China, with their great experience at building roads and bridges and airports and rail and dams and housing, the incredible explosion of building in China over the last 40 years, are now doing it in the global South. And in the chart there above, you can see also the number of projects. This is just in Africa, how much they've done in terms of health and education and transport and et cetera, water supply, sanitation, the amount of projects they're involved in. So in 2024, China's foreign direct investments kept increasing by 8% to about 192 billion just in that year. So even with the trade disputes with the US and China, China's exports are still growing. And how are they growing? Not in the US, they're growing in Asia, they're still growing in Europe, and they're growing in Africa and Latin America. That's where China has turned. So let's look at, lastly, spend a few minutes looking at sort of China's political rhetoric and sort of vision of the world order. And here we often hear China speaking about win-win relationships and a community with a shared future for humanity. Now, they're not talking about world socialism here. They're talking about global capitalism as a win-win situation, right? So China's foreign investments have helped develop the means of production. It's created a better base for industrial growth, economic progress, the growth of the proletariat throughout the global South. They also have helped increase social services and health and education. Try to show some of the stuff in the charts. But it's impossible to ignore how much their economic deals have mainly benefited state elites and transnational capitalists in the global South, rather than the working class in the global South. Now, one of the great accomplishments of Western capitalism was the birth of a large middle class, which all you are hoping to enter upon your graduation, I'm sure, to service its administrative and technical needs and fuel its markets. This has now happened in China, and it's happening in parts of the global South also, in part because of China's economic involvement in the global South. So that's really an advancement in many ways. But capitalism has never had the capacity to bring those benefits to the hundreds of millions who toil in factories and the fields. And if they did, of course, the profits of the capitalist class would crash, right? So when we're talking about a win-win situation, we have to remember this rhetoric is being directed towards global capitalism. It's the current world they're talking about as being, you could build a win-win situation under the current relations of production and the current regime of capital. Now, given such realities, China's rhetoric of a common destiny for humankind covers the deep class divisions that have always characterized capitalism. In a win-win policy, the rich seem to be winning a lot more than anybody else. China's rhetoric mixes a vision of equal human development with classic neoliberalism. And here let me quote directly from Xi Jinping. We must remain committed to developing global free trade and investments, promote trade and investment liberalization. We will expand market access for foreign investors, build high standard free trade zones, strengthen protection of property rights, and level the playing field. So this is China's common destiny for humankind. Many of those things have worked well in China, but does world capitalism have room for other countries and smaller countries to benefit like China did, as well as what's going on, of course, with the environmental crisis restricting what capitalism can now do on a global scale. So let me just end here with a few comments. How do we judge China? History shows us different strategies which attempted to build socialism. The new economic policy under Lenin, rapid and forced collectivization under Stalin, the great leap forward in cultural revolution initiated by Mao Zedong, and since Deng Xiaoping, market socialism. This obviously has been a difficult and complex task with no simple formulas or solutions. So we need to look at the historic experience and step back in making any judgments about what's going on today. The contradictory nature of Chinese market socialism, based on state-centric political system overseeing competitive and profit-driven market economy, has actually produced a very unique characteristic, a hybrid characteristics, both at home and abroad. Is China capitalist or socialist? I feel it's a multifaceted picture which needs more time to unfold before any declaration either way can be finally said. Thank you.
All right, I guess I will start with a little bit of background context in terms of what my perspective is and where my perspective comes from. I'm Chinese. Throughout the years, I've been trying very hard, like wherever I am, I've been trying really hard to stay very grounded and embedded in labor and leftist organizing in China. Right? I see myself first and foremost fundamentally as part of the leftist movement in China. So that's kind of like where I'm speaking from, even though, as a good leftist is always supposed to be, I remain very committed to the idea of international solidarity and things like that. But my political outlook has been shaped first and foremost by my commitment to leftist and labor organizing in China. So our moderator very curiously, actually, when our moderator was reading out the prompt, very curiously, he skipped the very first question, which was, what would it mean to call China communist? And I think that's a very that's a very interesting and important question because it is actually a question. It is actually a question, what would it mean for us to call China communist? Because throughout the years, I have had a lot of discussions and debates with my leftist comrades in the US, and sometimes this concept of communist China was invoked as a way to draw boundaries between support and opposition. Right? Like when we say China is communist, we support it. When we say China is capitalist, we are against it. Right? So it's kind of like this, kind of like drawing a boundary between allies and friends kind of strategy. But I guess that really raises a deeper question of what do we mean by what do we mean when we say we support or oppose China? Right? What does the very concept of China figure in this game of support and opposition? Right? Because sometimes these discussions and debates really feel like China is being thought of as this monolithic, very unified entity that we can either support or oppose in a very wholesale sense, like soccer club or something, right? But I think this kind of line of thinking is very problematic, exactly because it totally circumvents the question of class analysis, which any good Marxist leftist should always be paying a lot of attention to, right? Because whether China is socialist, or like whether we think China is socialist or capitalist, we cannot deny that in China, within Chinese society, there has always been class tensions and class struggles, right? In the 20th century, even as China was really experiencing and launching this very ambitious and revolutionary project to build socialism as a way to eventually arrive at communism, but China was never technically communist in the sense of having a classless society. Right? There were always classes. So as we all know from kind of like basic Marxist premises, whenever there are classes, there are class tensions and class struggles. So I think my kind of like the main point I'm really trying to emphasize is that I feel a lot of the lessons in terms of what we can learn from the experiences of Chinese Revolution, Chinese socialism, really requires us to look at the dynamics of class struggle in China over the past 7 or 8 decades in a very careful and meticulous way. And as part of that effort, it is as important to really take seriously, or I would argue prioritize, the perspectives of subordinate class actors in Chinese societies who are more having who are more kind of like advancing a bottom up, who are more advancing a bottom up or from below kind of class perspective. Because Chinese socialism was revolutionary, was inspiring, but I don't think it could only be seen as a project of the leadership of the Communist Party. The Chinese Revolution ultimately was not a party's project. It was a people's project. Right? It was a workers' project. It was a peasants' project. It is these more kind of like class actors situated among the kind of like the subordinate segment of society who are most eager to push the revolutionary project forward, sometimes even against the wishes and the orders of the party state. Right? So because I'm a scholar of Chinese labor history, so that's something I have been thinking a lot about and also teaching in terms of, yes, Chinese workers, when we look at what the Chinese working class was able to gain under socialism, it was tremendous. Right? It was a really transformative experience, both materially, ideologically, politically. But these gains experienced by the Chinese workers were not a result of some sort of party state's paternalist benevolence. Right? It was a really result of Chinese workers, the working class, seizing whatever space, right, whatever opportunity that was being opened up by the political changes to demand more, right? To really be more confident, more militant, and to just pose increasingly ambitious demands, and oftentimes, again, against the party state's wishes. Right? So under socialism, you really see this very kind of like dramatic process of workers' expectations constantly being risen, and then they acted accordingly, and that's what made Chinese workers experience rapidly improving, not rapidly, but notably improving living conditions. And that's how many Chinese workers were able to gain some meaningful sense of employment security in the mid-20th century. And that's also how Chinese workers were able to win a meaningful degree of workplace democracy, managerial power in the workplaces. Right? So again, I think socialism was not this project in which the party state was just delivering. It was more this project of opening up more spaces and horizons, so that workers, peasants, these ordinary people in Chinese society could think more bravely and could act more bravely so that they could demand more. And one more or less contemporary example was that over the past few decades, there was indeed relatively rapid wage increase, as Jerry already pointed out. But that increase was most rapid, or I would say most of that rapid wage increases really happened in the around the first 15 years of the 21st century. And why was that wage increase? Why was that wage increase able to happen? Of course, at that time the Chinese economy was growing very rapidly, but it was not like the bosses were automatically raising workers' wages in any meaningful sense, right? It really took several dramatic waves of strikes in China's manufacturing hubs, especially around the Pearl River Delta, for workers to pose wage demands, for workers to pose working conditions demands, for workers to pose social benefit demands, and sometimes, workers were doing extremely militant things like confronting the police, like occupying, just sitting down and occupying the street, highway, things like that. Right, so it was really that period, that repeated cycle of labor militancy that was eventually able to deliver better wages, like notably better wages that workers were somewhat still enjoying at this point, even though wage increase kind of stagnated after 2015, but that was another part of the story. So I guess in conclusion, I would say that we should never freeze China into this very static entity in which it was wholesale socialist, wholesale capitalist, or something we wholesale support or wholesale oppose. Instead, we should always look at the dynamics of class struggle internal to Chinese society in a very serious way, and we should always try to develop a sense of solidarity with Chinese working class, right, to really understand Chinese socialism and Chinese history from the bottom-up perspective of the Chinese working class. So I will end here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Devin, and I'm a supporter of the Spartacist League, the U.S. section of the International Communist League, Fourth Internationalist. I want to thank the first panelist for correcting that we did in fact defend the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And I think that, that kind of united front defense is absolutely called for right now when the left is being cracked down on by the Trump administration, and so is its corollary, which is open and honest debate among the left about what is necessary to go forward. In that spirit, yesterday was the 108th anniversary of the Russian Revolution, which was the greatest triumph of the workers and of the oppressed worldwide. So it's fitting that here today we should have a chance to debate the Russian question as it pertains to the People's Republic of China. In other words, what are the left's tasks toward those states in which capitalism has been overthrown? What is China for the left is generally answered in one of two ways by most leftists. On the one hand, there are those who argue China is a capitalist imperialist state which is competing with US imperialism for the domination of the world and seeks to supplant it as the world hegemon. On the other, there are those who argue China is on the cutting edge of anti-imperialist struggle across the globe, and the policies of the Communist Party of China, CPC, are proof of the triumph of socialism with Chinese characteristics. Both of these viewpoints are wrong. China is a worker state, but one that does not have a revolutionary leadership. We stand for the defense of the People's Republic of China. All communists must oppose attacks on China and unconditionally defend the gains of 1949. The 1949 revolution saw Mao's peasant armies throw out the capitalists and the landlords, a big step forward for the Chinese and world working masses. The state which came out of that revolution remains in power and has not been overthrown. There are a lot of people who argue that with market reforms, China went capitalist. But this position has nothing in common with how Marxists understand the transition from the rule of one class to another, which can only happen with the breaking up and replacement of a state form which defends the rule of one class or another. Look no further than the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. One does not find the old Stalinist state in place in any of these countries. There are no more hammers and sickles on the flags or people's armies, but in their place the tricolors of the local bourgeoisies, and new armies and new bourgeois states. There was no breaking up of the People's Republic, and the People's Liberation Army, which expropriated landlords and capitalists, still defends the state which issued from the 1949 revolution. The other question those who say the market reforms led to capitalist restoration cannot answer is how China was able to go from being a largely peasant country to being the leading industrial power in the world. Hundreds of millions were lifted out of poverty. What capitalist country could do this? Look across the border at India, a capitalist country which got formal independence around the same time as China's revolution, and it is clear there is something fundamentally different happening in these two countries. The collectivized property forms, established in 1949, undergirded China's rapid growth and development. But this growth and development came at the expense of creating a domestic capitalist class, which, while not calling the shots in China today, nevertheless poses a real danger to the gains of 1949. And distorted the planned economy because the whole way of development was China's integration into the US imperialist-led world order. China became a relatively cheap labor supply for manufacturing and geared its economy toward export for the world market, leading to less investment in education, healthcare, elderly care, etc. For example, some 900 million people live on less than 3,000 yuan per month, which is roughly 412 US dollars. While a lot of what existed earlier, the so-called iron rice bowl, was destroyed by the market reforms. Both the argument that market reforms reestablished capitalism and the argument they are paving the way for socialism are wrong. Socialism can only be built through the extension of the gains of 1949, which demands imperialist domination be swept away and working people take power, including in the imperialist countries themselves. The entire strategy of the CPC bureaucracy is based on maintaining globalization, which can no longer be done because the imperialists themselves no longer want it. This flows from the CPC's Stalinist conception of building socialism in one country, which has led it to seek a modus vivendi with the imperialists from the beginning, no matter which Stalinist bureaucrat was at the helm. Mao forged an alliance with Nixon while imperialist bombs rained down on Vietnam. Deng Xiaoping backed the anti-Soviet Cold War II in the 1980s. Today, Xi Jinping begs the imperialists to keep globalization going and talks about win-win cooperation, while the foreign ministry tweets out video clips of Ronald Reagan on the benefits of free trade. What unites all wings of the CPC bureaucracy, right or left, is peaceful coexistence with imperialism and socialism in one country. China's integration into the US-led order and its subsequent development has made it a serious problem for the imperialists, and they will stop at nothing to destroy China. The US is preparing militarily for war with China in the not-so-distant future. Trump wants to use tariffs to rebuild the US industrial base and military. The days of global integration and relative peace are over. Those leftists, like the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, who parrot the CPC's line, can only obstruct the successful defense of China. U.S. imperialist aggression against China is not only a dagger pointed against the Chinese people, but a threat to the economic and social conditions of the entire international proletariat. How do we defend China? This is the fundamental question for all Marxists. Not through putting any faith in international institutions set up by the U.S., which will always be beholden to capitalist interests. Not by looking to European countries, Japan, or any other U.S. ally which may, for now, seem critical of Trump, but will stand at attention when they are told to get in line. Not by putting any faith in the capitalist elites of the global south or Russia either, who will always put their own interests before those of the working class. The PRC must look to the international working class to defend itself. In the Pacific, the imperialists want to encircle China and whip up provocations over Taiwan. The workers and peasants of East Asia must be appealed to form an anti-imperialist united front, defending themselves and China from the designs of Western and Japanese imperialism. There is no better way to undercut the imperialist designs than for the PRC to stand as a champion of national and social liberation. Take Taiwan, for example. Most Taiwanese do not want reunification on the terms proposed by the CPC, which is one country, two systems. In other words, the maintenance of capitalism alongside Stalinist political repression. To reunify China and strike a blow against the imperialists in the Pacific, the answer must be to extend the gains of 1949 to Taiwan, expand democratic liberties for the working class, and political revolution on the mainland, with the workers taking the reins. The notion that the CPC leadership is some kind of anti-imperialist force in the world is given lie by their entire posture toward the Palestinian liberation struggle. Rather than providing the Palestinian resistance with missiles, drone swarms, and supplies to beat back the Zionists and their imperialist masters, Beijing appeals to international law. We think defense of China is bound up with the national liberation of the oppressed throughout the world. A blow against Israel would make it that much harder for the U.S. to successfully pivot to Asia. This is not some invention of ours, but what we advocate flows directly from the policies adopted by the Communist International after the Russian Revolution. The greatest danger, however, to the PRC is domestic. The Soviet Union fell because of internal flaws in the regime. The PRC has made great strides in technological, industrial, and military power, which give it the power to resist imperialist aggression. But it is much more vulnerable domestically. The capitalist class, while not holding on to political power, does have great economic and political influence. Its growth poses a direct threat to the continued existence of the People's Republic. Capitalist economic relations have exacerbated injustice, exploitation, and corruption, alienating the working class backbone of the PRC. The domestic capitalist class, including the Hong Kong tycoons and landlords, should be expropriated and all industry should be brought under workers' control, with workers' democratic control over industry and the state, full freedom to express their views and differences. These measures have little chance of long-term success, relying solely on domestic self-sufficiency. They must be part of a plan of international socialist construction. The PRC should coordinate its economic planning with the needs of workers in the global south and should confront the US dollar system. The PRC's hands must be extended to workers in the imperialist countries as well, not least in the US and nearby Japan, to support them in their struggles against their common enemy, US and world imperialism. This is the real way to defend China. It will undercut the domestic counter-revolutionaries, rebuild international working class unity, and push forward economic prosperity. Finally, the national question in China must be addressed. The imperialists always seek to manipulate nationalism and regionalism to subjugate China, as they did in the former Yugoslavia. However, the answer to the national aspiration of Uyghurs and Tibetans is not repression, forced assimilation, the present policy of the CPC. This policy can only push Uyghurs and Tibetans into the arms of the counter-revolutionaries. In its early days, the CPC stood for the right of self-determination. This demand must be fought for today by revolutionists in China and around the world. Lenin taught us unity between peoples can only be forged by opposing every form of national oppression. Only by granting the right of self-determination can real socialist unity be built against imperialism. We need to fight for an independent socialist Xinjiang and an independent socialist Tibet in an anti-imperialist alliance with the Chinese worker state. So, how to defend China is the key question, I believe, in this debate. Those who claim China is a capitalist state are capitulating to their own bourgeois rulers and aid them in weakening the Chinese deformed worker state. Those who claim the CPC can lead the Chinese proletariat to socialism only aid in preparing more defeats to come. The only way to defend China and extend the gains of 1949 is by rejecting both false roads in favor of an orientation toward the world proletariat and deepening the extension of the Chinese Revolution.
Thank you to all. Is this on? Battery's dead. So give me a new battery. Thank you to all of our speakers. Now we will have 4-minute short responses, starting with Mr. Iosbaker.
Thanks. And so I can actually answer the first question that was posed, since I took my 10 minutes to ask for a self-criticism from the platypus. Given your history, I'm not holding my breath, by the way, but I will respond to the topics that the other panelists addressed. So, the questions that platypus poses here are basically what we call loaded questions. So I'm just going to explain Freedom Road's views on China. So we believe China is a socialist country. This does not mean communist. That's a separate stage in human development. Socialism, as Marx and Engels described it, and as Marxism, Leninism has defined it since the victory in the Soviet Union. Socialism is when the working class and its allies take state power away from the capitalists, and China did that under the leadership of the Communist Party, with primarily a peasant-based revolutionary movement. But as Mao Zedong explained, when he developed the strategy that was victorious in 1949, the working class was the only class that actually had the ability to hold political power, and then from that point build socialism. And so they used the state, and several people have spoken about how they have done this, how the party has done this. They used the state to develop the economy and society to benefit workers and peasants. Granted, Jerry talked about the fact that there are still, a large number of workers who don't make the higher wages that the workers in the most developed plants and factories, most developed industrial section of the economy are. But overall, there is, not only, you compared it to India, where, the workers of India, their lives have gotten worse, over the last 75 years. There is no question that for the working class and the peasants in China, that their lives are vastly superior to what they were at the time of the revolution. In fact, they have one of the highest living standards of any country that had their history. China, I visited China in 1978. You know what the per capita income was in 1978? $184 a year. Today, the per capita income is $11,500
For factory workers.
for factory workers. But beyond that, it's not just the factory workers. It's the per capita income is pretty close to that for all workers.
About 13,500.
Thank you, comrade. Anyway, if you want to learn more about Freedom Road's views about China, you can go to our website frso.org. But what I want to talk about is socialist revolution here. So the starting point for socialism in this country is for the multinational working class, meaning workers of all nationalities, blacks, Chicanos, and other nationalities, taking political power into our hands. And then, just like the Chinese working class did, we'll take that political power and use it to transform this rotten society. And given the immense wealth that exists in this society, nobody in this country, nobody has to, be homeless. Nobody has to face, like so many people who suffer through, this rotten healthcare system, who suffer homelessness. This country has enough wealth. If the working class took political power, we would have the most advanced standard of living of any working class anywhere in the country, and bring an end to exploitation. So, like I said, communists since Marx and Engels have known that socialism is the stage of society that happens when workers overthrow the capitalist class. Communism is the stage of society after all classes have been eliminated. It lies many, many years, perhaps centuries in the future. So no country that has had a socialist revolution has claimed to be communist. And by the way, just very, very briefly, there are 5 countries in the world that have the political system that China has, and they all have the same characteristics. It's what Deng Xiaoping called the four. He defined it as 4 fundamental features: the dictatorship of the proletariat, the leadership by the Communist Party, adherence to Marxism, Leninism, and the socialist road. And there are 4 other countries in the world that have this same constitution, these same sets of principles. Does anybody know what the 4 other countries are?
North Korea, Cuba,
Vietnam,
Laos.
and Laos, correct. And you know what else? They all have the same list. All 5 countries recognize in their constitutions those are the principles of a socialist society, and they agree with each other. Thank you.
Well, I think the most important thing for us here in the United States is not really to make a decision about the character of China's society, socialist or capitalist or a hybrid. I think the most important thing for us is to prevent U.S. attacks on China. That's where we can make a difference, right? Peaceful foreign policy, a non-aggressive foreign policy. And we know that the capitalist class in the United States is feeling a lot of heat from China's development. They thought that globalization would bring China into the U.S. sphere as a junior partner. Of course, China had no such plans for itself, but for its own development, for its own independence, which it is still pursuing today. And the fact that they have created an independent path and this powerful technological base and manufacturing base is a threat to U.S. imperialism. So U.S. imperialism is now trying to be very aggressive towards China, contain China. So I think that's where us as either citizens or people here in the United States, that's where we should make our stand. That's the most important thing for us, is to advocate peaceful relations between the U.S. and China. And I think we could see by, you never know what Trump and MAGA are going to do with the trade stuff. It's up, it's down, it's aggressive, it's backtracking. But we can tell by what they're doing currently in the Caribbean, where they're just killing people, blowing up boats without any evidence of what's going on, is that their mentality is aggressive. The Department of War, right? So we have some serious work ahead of us in terms of international relations and trying to put pressure on this government here to seek to have peaceful relations with China. So that's what I would stress.
Cool. Okay, I will stress another thing in terms of what people, especially leftist organizers, could be doing in the U.S. in terms of building international solidarity, which is try everything you could to build class struggle in the U.S. That is extremely important because Chinese workers have actually been taking note, and they have been drawing inspiration from that. So just in general, the Chinese labor movement has been in very, very difficult shape, I would say, since 2015. So basically, over the past decade, the Chinese labor movement, the Chinese working class in general, has really, really been struggling. Part of that was, of course, the economic downturn, the economic slowdown, and of course, the trade war with U.S. has something to do with that. But then the bigger structural factor is really the collapse of all the real estate bubbles that really caused a big downturn in the construction industry, the infrastructural industry, and that kind of brought down the economy as a whole. So, as China was emerging from the zero COVID lockdown policies, at that time there was a lot of hope in terms of the Chinese economy might improve. But I think at this moment there was pretty much consensus within China that hope has been pretty much dashed. The economy has not been improving. The economy has been doing worse and worse, and with that you have increasing rate of unemployment, intensity, like increasing labor intensity for workers who are still able to cling on to their job, and also wage stagnation as well. Because basically after COVID, in most of the provinces in China, the minimum wage have been effectively frozen. Right? So you have all these economic difficulties with which the Chinese workers have been struggling. But also you also have a lot of political difficulties, right? In terms of really, there was really kind of like a significant increase in terms of the level of repression on any activities among different social sectors in terms of independent organizing, and cracking down on labor activism has been a huge part of it, right? So in the past few years, there have been several high-profile incidents when workers were trying to organize something that looked more like independent unions of their own, or even just mutual aid kind of groups, but those efforts were all repressed pretty promptly by the party state, right? So over the past decade or so, the Chinese labor movement has really been struggling, and for many of the comrades I have been talking to within the Chinese labor movement, what they really needed is a sense of there's still hope, right? There's still something that can keep people's hope up. And for people to get that sense of hope, they cannot just look inside China, right? They have to look outside to look at what workers in other societies have been doing. And because U.S. is still kind of like a world hegemon, right? So what is happening in the U.S. actually becomes global news that people can read. So for example, when the UAW was launching the Big Three auto worker strikes, actually, many auto workers in China were paying a lot of attention to that. Right? They were kind of like posting all these short clip videos on the Chinese version of TikTok, and there were like a lot of discussion on how could we have something like a union that could actually fight for us. Right? Workers were discussing these questions in the wake of auto workers in the U.S. going on strike. And another example, which was very recent, right, was Starbucks workers just voting to authorize the strike, which was very likely to happen next week. Then Chinese workers, like some Chinese workers, at least some of the labor organizers that have been trying to organize the more kind of the retail restaurant industry in China have really been paying attention to whether Starbucks workers are going to be able to strike and what are they going to be able to win. So these concrete instances of class struggle in the US actually can create resonance and reverberations in China, right, to make those labor organizers in China that have still been working on organizing, making them more resilient, making them more confident so that they can really have a sense that this is something that we can just continue to do. So I do think that is one way to concretely build international solidarity.
Well, I definitely agree that class struggle in the U.S. is a big way to help out the Chinese right now. Like that's what concretely anti-imperialism at home means: waging the class struggle against your own bourgeoisie, right? So I agree there. I think, I don't know, I wanted to respond to a few different comments that the others on the panel had just made. I mean, I think sort of like the idea that you're going to pressure the United States into a non-aggressive foreign policy is kind of ludicrous. I mean, the American imperialist bourgeoisie is not going to adopt a peaceful policy toward China under any circumstances. It sees China as its main competitor right now. It will not stop until either it is overthrown by the working class in the United States or until it overthrows the Chinese Revolution. These are the alternatives. There is no peaceful coexistence between China and the United States. On that same vein, I wanted to respond to the comments from the comrade from Freedom Road. I think that if you go back to Marx and Engels, they actually do not argue that socialism is when the working class take power. They argue that there is a period of there is a transitional period, right? They do not, the notion that after capitalism has been overthrown, you automatically have socialism is a revision of Marxism introduced by the Stalinists in the Soviet Union, who proclaimed that socialism had been achieved in 1930 when living standards were in the toilet, even though there was rapid industrialization going on. So it's a complete revision of Marxism, and I think that you want to talk about revolution in the United States. I'm all for it. I want we should fight out and debate what the strategy for revolution in the United States is. But I think on this same question, you have a completely revisionist line as far as how you're going to make a revolution in the United States, given your support for liberal politicians in the United States, like the mayor of this city. Chicago, mayor of Chicago.
Yeah, this sucks.
Can I just redirect?
Sure, shortly, yeah.
Okay, short. That we shouldn't do anything to try to pressure the U.S. government into a more peaceful relationship with China. Yeah, let's just give up, right? Why do we protest the war in Vietnam? Why do we protest the war in Iraq? Why do we protest the war in Afghanistan? Well, if we can't affect foreign policy, let's just go watch Netflix and blow it off. It's a surrender. It's an absurd surrender to the power of U.S. imperialism. We can't do anything, so let's not do anything. Come on.
That's not what's being argued. What you are arguing fundamentally is that there can be a peaceful relationship between the United States and China, which is not a possibility.
We could put pressure on the U.S. government not to go to war.
There's a difference between fighting against imperialist wars abroad and building illusions in pacifism, which is what you're advocating. Yeah. You cannot U.S.
Is that what we did during Vietnam? Is that what we did during Iraq? Is that what we did during Afghanistan?
I would say the bulk of the movement, yes, did support pacifist policies.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Sorry, sir. Real quick, let me start with on Saturdays where I collect food for the homeless and innocent in Chicago. I try not to work with the Western because obviously institutions fuck them. We're also going to do some political readings. I'm going to put my email up on the chalkboard if that's okay.
Yeah, you can do it afterwards.
Can I write over someone? They have to go now. Can I write over someone who's up there?
You just say it out loud if you want.
Okay, it's my first and last name, ZALALAHMAD 2026 at u.northwestern.edu.
One more time. I can't write that fast.
So you're writing it down. Okay, let's just see. So ZALAL M as in Mary, A as in Apple, D as in dog. 2026 at u.northwestern.edu. We're also going to do some political readings before we distribute. So.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, now we will open up for questions. As the moderator, I would like to take the prerogative to ask the first question, and then I will delegate it to the audience. My question to the panelists is, what is the relationship between the workers and the Communist Chinese Party? Because, as Mr. Zhang said, there might not be identity between the aims of the CCP and the aims of the workers. So how do we think about this relationship, and how could it, what type of relationship is it? And anybody can answer.
Well, I'll answer. I actually think that the Communist Party of China is the party of the Chinese working class. And let's remember, how big is the Chinese working class today? How many million proletarians are there? Does anybody know the number of Chinese workers? Not peasants, workers.
We're all peasants, according to J.D. Vance.
But 340 million? Is that's the number that I've heard? 340 million workers, people who are not farmers, they're workers. This is the greatest. This is the largest working class in human history, and this has been developed, through a period of 80 years of building socialism. And one more thing about the socialist character of China. One thing that Marx taught us is that capitalism has what? It has a cyclical set of built-in crises. The Chinese party has been in power since 1949. They have never had a cyclical crisis of overproduction. It has not happened. And the reason it has not happened is because they have a planned economy. It is socialist. They have not had a crisis of overproduction.
That means we know 2 days about China.
Yes.
Would anybody else like to answer this question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the party of the Chinese working class. It is the party of the Stalinist bureaucracy, which maintains itself in power against the interest of the international proletariat. It defends the CPC defends the property forms that came out of 1949 insofar as it is able to skim off the top of those property forms and ensure itself certain privileges over the rest of the nation. I would not call it yes, I'm sure there are workers who are part of the CPC. There are workers who are part of the Republican and the Democratic parties in the United States. But the CPC is not a party of the working class. It is a party of the Stalinist bureaucracy in China. Just look at how it responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, locking workers up in their homes, locking them up at their jobs. This was not a pro-working class policy pursued by the CPC. It is also not a pro-working class the CPC's international policy is also not a pro-working class policy. It is a policy of conciliation with imperialism all around the world. So I don't think I would say it's absolutely not a working class party.
I will not be commenting much on the overproduction point because I do think people in China experience rather differently. Right? So one key indicator is how much housing prices have been plummeting. But I think to the point of the initial question in terms of the relationship between the party and Chinese workers, I would say what you described as this FBI raid that happened to you a decade and a half ago, that has been constantly happening to my labor comrades and organizers in China. Not only for the past, not only for the past 3 or 5 years, but that has been happening for the past decade, past 2 decades. There were moments when literally each morning I woke up, I got news that some of my comrades were taken away. And they were not being taken away to a jail. You just didn't know where they end up. They were just disappeared. Right? And some of them returned after a few years, but there were still people whom we just didn't know where they ended up. And to be honest, 15 years doesn't really feel a lot when you compare what kind of sentence these Chinese comrades were subject to. So I do think these very challenging realities have to be taken into account. So again, I think here what we really need is to center the perspective from the Chinese labor movement.
All right, shall we move on to the next question? You have been very passionate.
Actually, I don't need that.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a few comments. Maybe I have one question though to you and you about your experience at BI. Is very unfortunate, but I would say this country is built on the dictatorship of bourgeois, and China is built on dictatorship of proletariat in theory. So we all have our own dictatorship. So things like that happen to the U.S. and in China as well. And arguably, in China, it's probably less reasonable. Like you said, people probably just disappear. Apparently, they have a different procedure, different process. So they do have different. I'm not being sarcastic. Different process. So from the U.S. standpoint, well, that's outrageous, but that works for them. As far as it works for them to a certain extent. Nothing is perfect. So that's my comment. Response to your experience. I mean, it's unfortunate. I wouldn't want to be in it, but U.S. is a dictatorship, just dictatorship of different class than China or Cuba and Vietnam. And number two, you're talking about promote a peace movement to reduce the probability of war or just eliminate the probability of war in U.S.-China. But my first thought is China can handle itself. On that respect, or on that front, if you look at the 9th September 3rd parade and many other news or update, you can see China can handle itself. It's not China, it's not going to vie for global hegemony with the U.S., then China cannot do it, and China doesn't want to do it. Traditionally, they don't want to do it. Today, they don't want to do it. But as far as their neighborhood, China can fully handle itself. On its own. But the question is, we still don't want a war, right? China can handle itself doesn't mean there'll be no war. Wars could be lose-lose situation. So how do we reduce the probability of war? I think I'm more optimistic. I appreciate the debate. That's a great panel. It's a great panel. There's even debate. I didn't expect that. It's great. And between commerce, I'm sure to a certain extent you guys are commerce. If I couldn't be included, but there are debates between commerce, right? So I think you guys are two sides, but I take the middle. I take another dimension. Number one, there will be no war. U.S. is not that stupid. If you follow it, you can say a little bit more on the optimistic side. But recently, at least Trump has softened his rhetoric. He's acknowledged, for example, G2. China is a peer. They're not going to fight China, at least. And their theory, their theories, the thinkers, that each country, China, Russia, U.S., maybe even India, has their own sphere of influence.
Would you please ask them a question?
Okay, I will. Yeah, actually, this is probing their response, so it's like a question. Okay, I will have a question.
Because we have a lot of questions,
Come
so
on,
I
come
wanted
on.
to make sure everybody has a
I'm going a little bit too long. If you can shut me down, you go ahead. What was that? Okay, yeah, the moderator, I respect that. And so U.S. they can see they're gonna avoid war with China. They're gonna go back to your own sphere of security or sphere of influence, which is Western Hemisphere, Middle East. They may have a little conflict with Russia, a little conflict with China, but not to the hard war. So I'm more optimistic about that. They will retreat for the most part to their own respective sphere of influence.
Okay, let me ask a question for Yueran and Devin. For Yueran, we have both sides, we have working class, but they everybody have different opinions. How do you convince them to go into jail? And how do Devin, you convince them not to think about Chinese and other immigrant workers are here to stay their job and eventually to prevent them from voting for Trump or a pro-terror policy that fit into that rhetoric?
Yeah, let me finish this.
Excuse me, sir. I would like the panelists to speak.
I'm responding to. He will respond to me. Your class issue, I just recently came back from China. Sit down! In 2 weeks. Oh, I sit down.
Excuse me,
I
sir.
respect that.
Excuse me, sir. I would like
Let
to
me
give
finish my point. There's China, there's a voice that they want to respond to society. That kind of goes along with your class rhetoric or your point. So they want to reshuffle, they want to have another revolution.
Sir, there are other classrooms. You can like deliver a talk in that.
There you go.
Excuse me. I would like for to respond to Shirji's question. Thank you.
Shiji, can you repeat your question?
Yes. So basically, still people have different opinions. Like some people think we need to organize, but sometimes think we need to fit in more the neoliberal order. For instance, we can see it from the U.S. foreign policy. Like they have more strict sanctions on Cuba, North Korea, because they are like more socialistic. We see it as pressure. So how do you convince working class people to take into power, to have the audacity to organize and fear the risk of being in prison? And for Devin, how can you convince it is not like working class people from other countries that are stealing American jobs?
Well, I mean, I never convince people to go to prison. This is just something. I do think, like, if you look at what has been happening over the past 2 decades or so in terms of workers' actions, then most of those actions were staged pretty spontaneously, right? Because and there was a transition from worker struggles being staged in a more aggressive way in terms of demanding relatively substantial wage hikes, things like that, which mostly happened around 2010. And indeed, that was a moment when workers' wages were growing pretty rapidly. But I would say after 2015, then I mean, workers were still going on strike, still staging those struggles, but their demands become more and more defensive, right? In terms of against wage cuts, rather than demanding wage raises. Or when a factory closed down, they demand severance pay. But again, that was also a very defensive demand, right? So I think in general, workers do not need to be convinced to struggle because their bosses, the capitalists, were constantly squeezing their breathing room. So just for whatever reason, right, like workers face injuries, they were fired unjustly, all these kind of things motivated workers to go on struggle. Right, so I don't think the struggle part needed to be need any kind of convincing or persuasion, but I think what really kind of like mattered was this sense that each time when you look at all of these cases of spontaneous strikes, then each time workers staged these actions, it felt like they were reinventing the wheel, right? It felt like they were just starting from scratch. There was no sense in which these experiences of workers' actions like were accumulative over time, right? Like workers didn't feel like they could learn from other workers who had gone on strike, who had gone on strike before them in terms of learning how to deal with risk, how to sustain their struggle. So there was very little collective learning in the process, and it was exactly. And that was exactly why a lot of labor organizers, right, not in terms of like workers themselves, but people who are trying to do organizing work, they were trying to bring different kinds of workers together so that they can learn from each other. Right, the Chinese working class could build up a kind of like a deposit of memory in terms of what struggles have happened in the past, so that we can do it better in the future. So a lot of labor organizers were trying to play that role, and it is exactly these kind of labor organizers that were facing the most severe repression and crackdown. But again, they did not need to be convinced by me to go to jail because they were already deeply committed to the project, right? I mean, like if you are like a full-time labor organizer or something, you are not really making much, right? You are just like facing a lot of surveillance, like day to day, right? It took a lot of commitment to be that part of the universe. And I think some similar things could be said about e-work organizers in the US as well. But yeah, I don't think either the workers or the labor organizers needed me to convince them to go to jail. But so again, on the one hand, the workers were struggling organically. Then on the other hand, labor organizers were trying really hard to build links between these organic struggles.
Okay, Mr. Thompson, I'd like to give you a chance.
Yep. So your question, just to clarify, your question specifically is about how would you convince like workers in the United States that their jobs are not being stolen by China? Is that essentially your question?
Yeah.
Okay. I think fundamentally, and this is a big problem of the left generally, there were a wave of factory closures in the 1980s, 1990s going into the 2000s, right? And there was no real pushback from the trade union leadership in the United States against this wave of closures. No strategy to stop them, like in terms of like fighting for plant occupations or fighting for anything that would actually like make the U.S. ruling class think twice about this course of action it was undertaking. That said, I think that the trade union bureaucracy in the United States promotes anti-China protectionism because it does not have a class struggle perspective. Its entire worldview is like, we got to work together with the American capitalists to dominate the rest of the world, and part of that is fighting to destroy China, right? And so I think it goes hand in hand with like there has to be a struggle within the American labor movement to defend China and to fight against the destruction of working class living standards here, because these struggles are linked together. Every blow that is struck against the American imperialist ruling class would benefit the workers in China and vice versa. So I think in China too, it's like expropriate these bourgeois, these capitalists, the domestic capitalists and everything like that, put China in a better position to negotiate deals with the West, while on the Western side, put the Chinese in a better position to develop as well by fighting against U.S. imperialist capital taking over and penetrating these other parts of the world. I think that's the way you do it. There has to be a connection and unity between the working class in the United States and the working class in China against the Stalinist bureaucracy in China, against the trade union bureaucracy and the capitalist class they actually fight for in the United States.
All right, are there any other questions? I would like to go to this person in the blue right here.
Thank you. So what would you tell a Rust Belt worker who has a steel mill shut down because operations got moved to China? How would you convince them that the Chinese are not the enemy?
Well, who moved the factory? It's not the Chinese did not come and take the factory away. It was the American capitalist corporation that moved the jobs out of the United States. There has to be, and I will say there has to be a real fight to reindustrialize the United States, and part of that could be fighting alongside workers in China to, push forward this idea of international socialist construction. I mean, I think like fundamentally they have a material interest in fighting against the same boss that shipped jobs overseas, in reindustrializing the country, and in defending China. I don't think any of these things are in conflict with one another. Now you might not be able to convince most workers immediately, especially right now. Workers have taken a major shift to the right under the Trump administration, and his appeals to protectionism were a big basis of that. But that's the kind of like patient argumentation that has to be had within the working class to show them that it's not just that the trade union leaders are undermining defending their jobs, they're undermining defending their wages, they're undermining defending anything that they get right now. And the anti-China stuff is part of that, because if the U.S. is successful in overthrowing the People's Republic, that will mean a race to the bottom in terms of jobs, living standards, everything, that makes what happened after the the counter-revolution in the Soviet Union kind of pale in comparison, because there's so many more, there's so much, it would turn China into a giant sweatshop, basically, for the United States and for the European imperialists.
Mr. Harris, I'm sorry, would either of you two like to respond to anything that's been said so far?
Well, I did work in a steel mill that got shut down by Ronald Reagan. I think the basic answer is to point your finger at globalization and transnational capitalist class as the real enemy of the workers, right? And not Chinese or Japanese. I remember when the car industry was, in fact, workers in Detroit killed turned out to be a Chinese guy they thought was Japanese, and they murdered him because of the car stuff. So it's a difficult struggle, but it has to be made. And I think somebody like, like Bernie Sanders has started to make that argument pretty well, to point the finger at the real enemy and continually do that, So that's where the struggle lies.
All right, let's open up to further questions. Oh, would you like to comment? Sorry.
That's all right. So Jerry was leaving the labor movement about the time that I joined the labor movement. He's only 10 years older than me, but he went in early and then came out to be an academic. And I spent 30 years working at the University of Illinois at Chicago and was a leader in the service employees. And built up the union to the point that in the depths of COVID, we had one of the biggest strikes in the country in the fall of 2020. But one of the things that there's this myth. It's not true that China took most of the industrial jobs that left the United States. The largest factor for the loss of those jobs was mechanization. I mean, the United States still produces a shitload of steel. They just don't have 20,000 workers in Gary. They're scattered all over the country in small steel mills. And the United States still produces a hell of a lot of cars. But the disproportionate amount of them are in the South, where they're not unionized, and a lot of it is owned by Japanese or German automakers, and so the way that the other comrades have described the reason that the working class in this country didn't put up a real fight around the organized working class around that. Those things are true, but this is what I want to say as a Marxist-Leninist. The working class in this country wants to fight. What they need is direction. They need organization. And so, if there are any young communists here who believe in the working class in this country, I would urge you to do what Jerry and I did. Either drop out, which is what I did, or if you decide to take a break from school, do like Shiji, go get a job in a factory. A warehouse, rather. You were working in a warehouse. And go among, what did Mao Zedong say? He said, go among the people, become one with the people, and serve the people. The working class in this country wants to fight. I saw that in the strike that I helped lead in the fall of 2020. I was a member of that union and a leader in that union for 30 years. And the hatred of my coworkers to their bosses was so palpable. And when they finally got the opportunity to go on strike, it was like Liberation Day, to coin a term from Trump. It was, what did Lenin call it? He said a revolution is a celebration of the oppressed. That's how it felt on those picket lines. And workers today, one of the most exciting things that's happening in the working class is this revolt that has taken place within the Teamsters, especially actually within the United Parcel Services. And so right now, actually, there's a national convention of Teamsters, reformed Teamsters, taking place in a hotel out by O'Hare. They've built up a real class-conscious reform movement, and the main leaders of that reform movement are socialists. They're people from the former. Does Solidarity still exist?
I think so.
All right. Anyway, it was a tendency from the Trotskyist movement. Labor Notes. That's it. Labor Notes. Teamsters for Democratic Union, and then the other major component in that reform movement are members of Freedom Road Socialist Organization. So this is This is the model for how to build, and Jerry referred to his uncle. His uncle was a leader in the textile workers back in the Great Depression who led a walkout, helped build the union. This is what communists did all over the advanced capitalist world. If you're interested in actually, fighting for socialism, let's not spend too much time thinking about the contradictions going on inside of the Chinese class struggle. Let's make a class struggle happen here.
All right, are there any questions?
Over here.
Sir in the black shirt, yes? You.
Blue, but
Oh.
so, no, I just wanted to, the devil's in the details. Just a comment about that that's actually connected to the question I had. So, TDU helped elect O'Brien and Zuckerman, right? Sean O'Brien, who's like now a big fan of tariffs, who didn't call the UPS store. So the question is, how do you actually remove the obstacles to class struggle? So that obviously one of the points is that the American labor bureaucracy is tied to the Democratic Party, and a big part of the left had been cheerleaders for that, telling people to vote for Obama, or telling people to vote for Joe Biden. And that certainly didn't work out very well for defense of China or defense of the American working class.
I organized the march on the DNC, so I'm not in that category.
In 2020, the FRSO told people to defeat Trump, vote for Biden.
Yep.
Yes. So, but just to expand on this question and ask every the panelists. So, I'm from the Spartacist League. We entirely agree that waging the class struggle here is key, not only for inspiring the Chinese working class, but the question of staying the hand of U.S. imperialism, not by electing somebody different. So the question is, what are the concrete obstacles to actually making things happen in the working class here? Why is the labor movement flat on its back?
Anybody can take a stab at it.
Well, I wouldn't say the labor movement is flat on its back. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on, as with the UAW, as with the Chicago Teachers Union, as with sections of SEIU. There's a lot of communists, Marxists, and socialists who are active in the labor movement. Starbucks, what's going on with them and organizing. The capitalist class has what we would term cultural and ideological hegemony in the United States, right? So you have to fight against the ideology. You have to fight against what is commonly assumed by millions of people. But reality has a way of imposing itself on people's minds. So you can't get away from what's happening in the United States today with growing poverty, inflation, attacks on immigrants, the violence of the Trump administration. All that moves people, right? It moves people to the left, hopefully. If, as Joe was calling for, socialists and communists, progressive activists, get out there and organize, roll up our sleeves and organize. So that's the task in front of us. I would call actually for a united front against fascism. That's what I think we're facing here. There's always traitors. There's always traitors within the labor movement because of the incredible influence and pressures of the capitalist system. But that's it. Go ahead.
Oh, if you're
Well, I think, yes, I mean, there certainly there are no shortage of people who call themselves socialists or Marxists or communists within the labor movement. The problem is they don't offer a fundamentally different strategy for the labor movement than is what is offered by the so-called progressive wing of the trade union bureaucracy in this country. There's not like an attempt by the Marxists within the labor movement to put forward a strategy connecting what the struggle is, whatever the immediate struggle is, with the necessary struggle for the working class to take power. In other words, actually fighting for like the day-to-day reform or whatever in a revolutionary way. And I think that like the example of the UPS, the non-strike at UPS is instructive in 2023. You had a situation where the International Longshore the International Longshore and Warehouse Workers Union was without a contract on the West Coast, where the UAW was about to possibly go out on strike at the time. And then you had the Teamsters at UPS. You had Biden, who was flailing around, and he did everything in his power to put the screws to the trade union bureaucrats, even though while the worker, there was a lot of pressure coming up from the ranks, because this is coming out of COVID, people are dealing with inflation, there was a lot of pressure to do something, to fight back, right? And the union bureaucrats, because they don't want to upset the apple cart for Biden, call it off. UPS, no strike. ILWU agrees to a deal. UAW does go out on strike, right? But the strategy pursued, even though they did go on strike, the strategy pursued by the bureaucracy did not get even there were some gains, that's true. But it did not get what the workers were initially talking for, right? 32-hour work week, any of those things, Marxists and the labor movement have to actually go up against not only the right wing of the trade union bureaucrats like Sean O'Brien, but the popular, the liberal, progressive wing of the trade union bureaucracy, which is the best salesman for U.S. imperialism within the labor movement, because it can talk left, it can raise a bunch of progressive demands. These people like Sean Fain, who talked about, we need a ceasefire in Palestine. And then what did he do? He endorsed Kamala Harris. This is how this chain works. These union leaders have a class collaborationist political program, and they have to be defeated and replaced with Marxists to actually lead the working class to victory in the class struggle. That's the only way forward. So in the UAW strike, our organization went to Detroit, and we had 3 demands in what we were talking to workers about: black liberation, reindustrialization, and no tears. That was it. But it got a hearing from workers. At Boeing last year, when there was a strike of the Boeing workers in Seattle, we were able to work together with a group of workers to try and push that strike forward, while the union bureaucracy was trying its best to knife the strike and did everything it could to undermine it in the way that it organized, led, and fought the strike. And in the end, the Boeing workers got the shaft. It's unfortunate. These lessons have to be learned, and the Marxists and the labor movement have to actually draw a line against these elements within the labor movement, rather than jumping into bed with one opposition caucus or another. The line has to be clear: no support to the capitalist parties for an independent, and there has to be an independent working class oriented strategy that mobilizes the power and solidarity of the rest of the working class to actually get what workers need.
I have a question for Bob.
Ms. Ben.
I think it's interesting and a little surprising that the conversation has become about the kind of contours of U.S. labor politics. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but I think it opens up the kind of importance of making clear, why might nonetheless an organization like FRSO or the Spartacist League say and defend China, right? Not that these things are discrete, but just what is the relationship of these things? So, my question is, what is the function of the call for support of a particular country? Is it at the expense of conceiving of the working class as necessarily international? I'm thinking of the Kuomintang, which massacred Chinese communists after the Stalinizing Bolshevik Party mandated that they unconditionally tail it because the USSR was conceiving of the urgency of finding allies contra, at that time, British imperialism. If the working class, sorry, my notes are a total mess. If the working class takes power under the ideological banner of nationalism, can we seriously think of it as an advance in the struggle for socialism? Does China, as a geopolitical unit, represent the interests of workers, domestically or internationally?
Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to weed my way through the question a little bit. Why raise the slogan to like defend a particular country? Well, it's not just like it's never abstract, right? In China, something happened in 1949. The landlords and the bankers and the capitalists were overthrown, and that is why Marxists are duty bound to defend China. The same is true in Vietnam, in North Korea, in Cuba, in Laos. In these places where capitalist rule is overthrown, Marxists must unconditionally defend the gains of what happened in these countries against counter-revolution. Otherwise, you're just essentially covering up for your own imperialist ruling class. These are wins for the internet. You will never conquer new things unless you're able to defend what has already been won. And that was true of the Soviet Union as well. Most Marxists didn't, unfortunately, but Marxists should have defended the Soviet Union to the end. Sorry, I couldn't follow the rest of the question, but I just wanted to deal with that particular point. Why is it important? Because these are actual gains the working class has made. They are being undermined every day by the rule of the Stalinist bureaucracy in China. And therefore, to preserve and deepen them, those bureaucrats have to go, and the workers and peasants need to be the ones who are taking charge in China.
Comrade Thompson, could I just ask for a clarification, though? In the same way that you say calling for the defense of the country is an abstract, the nature of the call for defense is also specific. I mean, this year, the Spartacist published an open letter to the Communist Party of China, basically listing a set of recommendations and demands for defending the Chinese Revolution, right? Is there a difference between saying that defending the gains of 1949 ought to be directed to the CPC versus the Chinese workers?
The point of directing a letter to the CPC is that the CPC is a large organization. There are no doubt people within its ranks who are genuinely feel that they are defending the gains of 1949. Now, we think in general, it does represent the Chinese bureaucracy, but there are also people who join to get a job, right? There are also people who fundamentally believe in the convictions of communism who are part of the CPC. So, what better way to try to address those people than to write an open letter and to actually put forward a course of struggle that could fundamentally defend China and that is fundamentally different from the policies being pursued by the Stalinist bureaucracy right now.
I'm sure millions of people in China read the letter, right? I mean, come on. That's absurd. Look, let me ask a question here. How many people here defended the right of Palestinian people to self-determination? We're active in that. That's great, because, see, we can make demands on our ruling class and our government on international questions, including a peaceful policy with China, not sending from a small, very small Marxist organization here in the U.S., sending a letter to the Chinese Communist Party telling the workers there what to do. I mean, my God, get a grip on reality. I'm sorry. I'm just sorry. Yeah.
I want to step back a little bit and address something that came up earlier in the discussion. U.S. imperialism is in deep shit, all you have to say to describe how bad the crisis is the name Donald Trump. The fact that guy is president and is basically making things vastly worse for with his policies. U.S. imperialism, however, sits on a worldwide, system of exploitation and oppression, and they have still the largest military might on earth, and they are threatened more than anything else at this point by the rise of socialist China, the economic advances of socialist China, and they are preparing for a war with China. And this is not a maybe, this is not, how could they do that? They are making concrete plans to go to war with China. And so whether or not you support China or see China as socialist, as Freedom Road does, whether or not you're Chinese, whether or not you're just somebody who cares about humanity. We, as people who live in this country, have a responsibility to oppose what our government is preparing to do. And that's why Freedom Road joined Friends of Socialist China and the No New Cold War Coalition, and we recently sent a delegate on a trip to China, our Sydney Loving. You can read about it on frso.org. A member of our standing committee, a young person, and you know, we're going to send more people to China because in order to help defend China against the threat of U.S. war, the United States is preparing for war with China. It's not like, oh, you know, that what a fool's errand. No, they're making military plans to go to war with China. And what revolutionaries in this country have to do, we have to prepare to do for the Chinese what we've done for the Vietnamese, what we've done for the Filipinos, what we've done for the Palestinians. We have to tear this country apart from the inside in order to guarantee either that the United States is unable to go to war with China, or if the fools dare to go to war with China, it'll be the last war that they ever start, because we'll bring an end to their system from inside the United States.
Mr. Zhang,
No, I'll pass.
May I ask, what's your plan like in China? You said you're planning to go to China. What's your plan there?
Our plan?
What are you going to do in China to help them?
So we're not going there to help them. We sent people there to learn from them. From the advanced experience of Chinese socialism, which is...
Which part of socialism, like the Chinese labor movement that has been so long suppressed by the government, or the so-called CPC officials? They call themselves socialists.
Yes, we support the government in China. We do.
Okay. I would like to go to the person in the back.
Yeah, okay, yeah, my name is Bernard. I'm a supporter of the Spartacist League as well. And Miss Jerry Harris, you don't really understand, you know, this country you can't understand because of your revolutionary perspective. But the point of the letter to the CPC, obviously it's to the CPC and people in China who would read that. And fortunately, we've got a lot of response. We got a lot of responses from that letter. People criticizing us for being soft on the government because we sent them a letter. And people were saying, well, you got it all wrong. We're the new wave Maoists over here. We're the people you should be talking to, okay?
It's funny.
We want to talk to all those people. Because we think there's the element within all those organizations, all those bodies, that actually want China to advance along the communist road, along the socialist road, okay? So therefore, that's what that letter is for. And one other thing about, look, we do not want to offer the Chinese, the workers and peasants in China, these empty, well, we're going to come and see what you think. No, you want to have debate with them, argue revolutionary policy versus the policy of the CPC. Okay, that's what you want to do. That's what you want to do. You want to have a revolutionary perspective. You don't just tail the people who have betrayed the Chinese working class while running the government while running the PRC into the ground.
Sir, do you have a question for me?
Yeah. I would have like to the comrade here is that what is your perspective? You've spoken a lot about the working class struggle in China. What do you fundamentally disagree with what my comrade Devin said? If you do, could I just get a sense of what you, because a lot of things you say are right on the mark. But I just want to know what is the fundamental difference, because this is we have to find out our differences. What is the fundamental difference you see between what you believe right now and what the International Communist League is arguing?
Okay, I guess I think my difference or disagreement is not really on the level of political principles, but more on what should people be doing right now, right? And again, going back to Ben's question, I really do not buy into this idea of we being supportive of a country. Because again, as I understand it, a country is not really a real subject, right? Like country is not the person, a country is not the actor. When you are saying you are in supportive of country, what does that mean? So my reformulation would be we should, of course, be in a deep sense of solidarity with Chinese workers and Chinese people, right? That's fundamentally different from saying we are in support of China as a country. And I think, so if we reframe the question in that way, then what can happen on the ground concretely? Let me give you two examples. The first example is in 2022, workers at the Foxconn plant in Zhengzhou, which was the biggest Foxconn plant in China, went on not exactly strike, but they went on a violent riot, both against the factory management, but also against the police. Then it was extremely militant. The workers were literally burning down police cars, police vehicles. And a few days later, a group of Chinese diasporic students organized a rally in front of the Apple headquarters in NYC. Right? But it was a very small handful of people, like 5 or 6. It didn't, draw a lot of attention. It was basically a non-event. But, these things could have been built better. Right? That's one example. Another example is back in 2019, when Chinese workers in the IT industry were launching this whole campaign against 996, right? Against overwork. It got really intense. Like those IT workers were really trying to use GitHub, right, as the kind of key organizing platform. But then GitHub was under a lot of pressure from the Chinese government, actually, to close down that specific section of discussion. So some American workers working for Microsoft, which I think was the parent company of this GitHub thing, were actually running a campaign within their company to demand Microsoft not close down those discussions on GitHub that were being waged by Chinese workers against overwork. So I think there are very, very concrete things that workers in the US can do to concretely support worker struggles in China, right? Not addressing the party, not learning from the government, but concretely supporting workers' struggles in China.
Thanks everyone for your remarks.
Yes.
I have a few questions. I'm a little bit surprised that the question of the party hasn't been made explicit here. We kind of just presuppose that there is an existing party in order to act on our lines. And my question is, what is the role of a socialist party? Is there a need for a socialist party? Also, I'm not sure I would say that there is actually a workers' movement, an international workers' movement for something like a party to intervene in currently. So what's to be built up currently? And I think Yueran gave a good example of what happens when there isn't something like a party to sustain education, right? But there was no way to sustain this sort of experience that these workers were accumulating. They would have these actions and then there was no way to sustain it. And I think this is exactly the sort of situation that happens when there's no party to discipline this activity. And Jerry, I share your kind of frustration with the constant, banging on the table about the necessity of revolution when there is no revolutionary movement present today to intervene on. But it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're advocating is to just continue supporting the Democrats against Trump, the fascist, right? And so I'm not sure that, like, what we need to do is advocate for peace. Because in some ways, the capitalist politicians will figure out a way to figure out what needs to happen in order to sustain peace. In some ways, Trump is doing that now with Israel, Palestine, and China.
And there's a trade deal.
And there's a trade deal. So, what is the role of the left?
Should we advocate for not sending arms to the Israeli genocidal government? Well, this question, should we advocate that?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Like not sending arms? Like I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Yeah. So we're against genocide in Palestine, right? So why aren't
I'm not
we?
sure anyone's pro-genocide.
In the United States, yeah, there are people who are pro-genocide. But the point I'm making to you is this: that if we can make that demand on the U.S. government, we could also make the demand that they don't go to war with China, right? In terms of the Democrats, I believe there's an anti-fascist majority in the United States. And I think we have to unite with all our friends and all our allies to defeat fascism. That includes, yes, sections of the Democratic Party. It includes AOC, it includes Tlaib, it includes Omar, and it includes the Progressive Caucus within the Dem. So the Democratic Party is not just this one big thing. The Democratic Party is in fact split. There's all sorts of sections of the Democratic Party. There's a left wing around the Squad. There's a progressive wing, rather large, has about 100 members in it in Congress. And then there's corporate Democrats. And I know that there's some sections of the left, like the Spartacist. Democrats, they're all bad. You can't touch them. It's the third rail. You get electrocuted. Yeah,
Yep, every single time.
Yeah, right. Every single time. But we know that the struggle of the working class and the masses of the United States has always been able to win victories and force the Democrats into certain positions that they don't want to do, like in alliance with the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, get the hell out of Vietnam, with some allies to pass legislation to deconstruct Jim Crow white supremacy in the South. Those are victories. And so...
Do you need the left for that? Do you need socialism?
Yeah, of course. That's what I'm saying. But we have friends and we have allies. It's just not the left. We have friends and allies, and an anti-fascist front. We need everybody to defeat fascism.
Yeah, I want to try to respond to all of your questions. So first, what is the role of a socialist party? The role of a revolutionary party is to intervene in the struggles of the oppressed, provide them with guidance, and fight against any obstacles that stand in the way of the liberation of the working class and all the oppressed. Okay, and so that means actually dealing with obstacles, like the Democratic Party. I will get to that in a moment. On the question of there's no international workers' movement to intervene in, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by this.
I mean what I meant.
Okay. Well, I think there are struggles that are happening. Okay, there are struggles of workers that are happening. Sure, it's not on the scale as it was in the 1930s or even the 1900s. Fine. But Marxists have a duty to intervene in those struggles, to win over the advanced section of the working class and anybody else who's involved in some of these social struggles, like the Palestine movement, by putting forward a different kind of strategy for the movement against the liberal strategy that is pursued by the leadership of these movements. So I think it's important, like if you don't intervene, you're either standing on the sidelines and shouting into the air, or you're just falling in line behind the liberals who will lead these movements to defeat, whether it's the labor movement or the pro-Palestine struggle or even just defending China. On the question of the Democrats, leaving aside the fact that I do not think we are facing fascism right now, I do think that every time you touch the Democratic Party, you do get electrocuted. And it is really rich to talk about the end of segregation just a few miles from Chicago, Illinois, the most segregated place in America. Well, one of the most, it might be number 2, whatever. But the point is, the Democratic Party is where everything goes to die, right? This is where the left has spent its, is pushing the Democratic Party, killed the pro-Palestine movement last year. You know how it did? Because you had progressives like Rashida Tlaib come out and tell everyone to go and register as Democrats and voting uncommitted. You have these people like AOC who vote to fund Israel's genocide, who you want to say are our allies. They are not. They should be expelled from organizations like the DSA. They should have no place on the left, and leftists should not be their lawyers. This is an imperialist party whose entire record is the strangulation of working class struggles throughout history, the strangulation of black struggle, the strangulation of neo-colonial countries. You talk about Vietnam. Who started the Vietnam War? It was the Democratic Party raining bombs down on Vietnam, okay? Sure, they got buyer's remorse after it was clear that the Vietnamese were winning, which was a victory for the world working class. But having anything to do with the liberal wing of the imperialist ruling class is a death sentence for working class power and internationalism. And that is one thing that the left has to break from. It has to break from it has to break from supporting the Democratic Party and even supporting the liberal ideology which glues it back to the Democratic Party, even if it's formally outside of it.
Would you like to respond?
No, I've spoken enough.
Okay.
I did want to make one point in.
There are other people who have questions.
Unrelated, but Joe, you mentioned that there was an article published in the PR where a Platypus member advocated for the arrest of FRSO members. I would love to see where you read that because I can't find it. Don't know what you're talking about.
It was in 2010.
Okay.
It's a long time ago.
Okay, sir in the hat.
Okay, so just real quick, there's a few quick things that I wanted to mention. One, I think there's a common theme here that you all are kind of debating about, that we can't put pressure on the U.S. government to not wage war. I think there's a reason why, for example, with Venezuela, they spent the last 15 years lying to us about Venezuela, so that eventually, if they want to sway public opinion, they want us to support what they're doing. Obviously, like there's a reason, like you, Jerry mentioned, why they ended up leaving Vietnam and taking the defeat. And a big part of that was because of how unpopular it was, right? If they can make something a lot more popular, they can wage war longer. And so I guess part of my question is, what is your, because I feel like for people that are living in the U.S. and especially white people, it's not your job to decide whether or not a movement is perfect or a government is perfect in another country. Your job is to oppose all aggression against that government and the people, because obviously it's going to be the people that are going to feel it, right? So I think obviously China is not like this glorious communist country, but it doesn't have to be for us to say, well, I don't think we're going to sway the Chinese government to do anything. I think what we can do is put pressure within the U.S. to oppose a war against China, and that we can definitely do. And then I think, this was already brought up. Part of, I guess, one of the questions I had was for platypus. Who's in platypus here? Okay. So is there anybody that knows about the platypus siding with the FBI against FRSO? Because I really wanted to hear a response to that. Or
we can.
We can talk about it now.
Yeah, we can talk about it afterwards.
But nobody here knows anything about that?
No.
Okay. So my question is what is what is the role then of the people here in the U.S. that like yourself, that you're like a communist and you're criticizing the Chinese government? Since we can't, I don't think we can't sway or there's not. What are we gonna do about we can't convince the Chinese government to be a better communist party? What are you trying to do then if not to stop a war against China?
Well, I would say that the main thing is to reach out and talk to the working class in China. We published a lot of our materials in Chinese. We were trying to win workers over to our perspective. And so we actually have a new issue of Spartacist that's out in Chinese, and we're trying to convince the workers there that this is what needs to happen in order to actually fundamentally defend China. I mean, as far as the United States goes as well, I think it's sort of like this question has been distorted by the other panelists into the argument that I advocate doing nothing, which is not the case. What I'm saying is the only way to make the to force the imperialists out is to actually fight on a class struggle basis, right? Like, this is why these past peace movements did not fundamentally succeed in their aim. They had a policy of conciliating the liberal wing of the bourgeoisie, and they did not go beyond that policy. That is the fundamental problem. That is the fundamental problem today in the Palestine movement, which is tied in one way or another to the liberal wing of the ruling class. That, you know, that's the example I used before for Rashida Tlaib. There has to be a fusion of these of the fight to defend China with the working class. That is the only way, like through strikes, through hot cargoing arms that are, like, for example, in with regard to Israel, like arms going to Israel, like actually motivating the working class to take action. You can raise any demand you want, but if you don't have the power to actually enforce it, it's meaningless. And the people who have the power to enforce those demands are the working class, and that has to be the fight that's waged within the working class here. I mean, generally speaking, just in response to your question as well, I think the duty of Marxists is to fight to provide leadership. I don't think there is like some like prohibition on a Marxist arguing in favor of what they think is necessary because of where they're at. That has to be something that Marxists take seriously. Like the Bolsheviks, when they were running the Communist International, they talked to the comrades and the communists who were in other countries and asked for their opinions on what was happening. You know, there was an alliance between the German workers' leaders and the Bolsheviks in Russia. So that's my answer on that.
Would any other panelists like to speak on it? No? Then we'll take a question. You've in the Illinois sweatshirt.
Well, I wonder how some of you would evaluate whole process people's democracy, as they call it in China. Because, you know, as I know, there are local people's congresses there are mass orgs, and they feed those ideas up the ladder, you know, it's not just top down. So how do you evaluate the efficiency of that, the efficacy of that democracy versus, you know, this multi-party competition style democracy we have here?
I think that is a very good model. That is what socialism looks like today. There's, you know, I can't imagine the complexities of, you know, leading a country of that size. But the progress from the beginning of the revolutionary movement in the 1920s, you know, through victory in '49, through the launching of, you know, of the, I mean, there were a number of setbacks, including the Cultural Revolution, but overall, the Communist Party has been able at each turn to figure out how to move forward in a popular way. I think anybody who claims that the Chinese party is not popular is not in touch with the reality. I'll say this, the number one reason is because of what several people have talked about. In 1949, the peasants were given control of their land. The landlords were overthrown and land reform took place. And it still exists. Anyway, I think fundamentally that socialism in China is popular. I think fundamentally the party is popular, and I think fundamentally that the whole what's it called, whole party socialism, whole country socialism. I think it's a model for other countries coming out of being oppressed by imperialism.
So does the worker being oppressed count as the people being part of the general procedure of democracy?
like the people being oppressed, just mentioned by Professor Zhang, do them count as a viable part that can be actively participated into Chinese politics?
I think it's very telling that now we have a white man who is saying a Chinese man is out of touch with Chinese reality.
Do you have any substance outside of identity politics to refute?
But I think this is very symptomatic of US imperialism in an intellectual and epistemological way.
Sir, I think there is a problem.
I think, okay, so beyond substantive evidence, beyond identity politics, I do feel like in this country, sometimes or for us as people of color, people from non-US origins, people not identifying as, cisgender, things like that, then yes, identity politics does matter because I've had enough time being talked down by white men, being lectured down by white men for Chinese reality. That has just happened to me way too many times. And I refuse to continue to be gaslit. I feel this is a question about gaslighting. All right, okay, on this whole process, all people democracy thing, right? He didn't even know the term, right, apparently. This whole process, all people democracy thing, is completely a sham. I would call it this way.
Exactly.
What kind of democracy does China have when minimum wages have been effectively frozen in most provinces since 2020? What kind of public input goes into this kind of decision making to effectively freeze minimum wages for more than 5 years? And then speaking of the local congresses and things, yeah, I mean, there are quite a number of people that over the last round of local elections for local people congresses, they were trying to run as independent candidates, but their eligibility for standing in the election was outright denied. What kind of democracy is that?
These congresses are rubber stamps.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
And you can check who are in their company.
Yes.
They're bureaucrats. They're bureaucrats.
Excuse me, does anybody have a question?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I've raised my hand for the whole time. Yeah, so first and foremost, I will raise a question, then I'll have a few comments. Like, the first question is that I guess right now, 2 out of 3 people in the front are pro-government, but yeah, one of them even said we should unconditionally support China. I guess he is talking about Chinese government. But I do think there should be some borderline. There should be some borderline. Like,
What's your question?
what is the borderline? What is the borderline for your support to China? And I would like to add some comments on that to provide some context. We were talking about Palestine. And do you know that China do own some cooperation that fund Israel? China has it's a very famous comic in China called Taiwan. They're actually funding the surveillance system on Palestine.
HKG is the English name.
And I would say there are multiple companies controlled by Chinese government that are actively trading with Israel, funding their surveillance and segregation and genocide on Palestine. That's a fact. So we cannot say we support China, so we stop genocide. That's a contradiction. And I would like to add some more context. We were always talking about 1949. We're talking about something like almost a century ago. But we are living in a very rapidly changing world. And China right now is not that China back in 1949 anymore. So when we are talking about supporting China, we must be talking about supporting the China right now. So we must be more rooted in the China we have right now. And you must to learn about what is happening in China right now and the relationship between the working class and the CPC. I think that's essential for your support to China. All right, that's it.
Would the panelists like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a line, right? Like, it's defend what happened in 1949, defend that, but don't defend or support the policies of the Chinese Communist Party, which is carrying out a conservative international policy, like the things you said about Israel, like reject the foreign policy promoted by the CPC, reject the conciliation of imperialism at home and abroad. And I mean, that would be the line, right? Like, we don't support the CPC. We think there needs to be a political revolution in China which preserves what came out of 1949, which was a gain for the working class, but deepens that, expropriates the capitalists in China, changes the foreign policy to be one that promotes international revolution rather than deal-making with the imperialists, funding Israel, maybe not funding Israel, but actually giving weapons and arms and everything to Palestine to fight against the Israelis, that actually promotes revolution around the world rather than the role it plays now, which is to conciliate the imperialists and try to patch up the falling apart globalized world system. So I'd say that would be the line.
Would you like to respond?
Just briefly. Last time I spoke at the Academy of Social Sciences, which you probably know is a party think tank in Beijing. I discussed with them and argued with them a bit about the need for a greater civil society in China. And I don't know if that's too of a Western concept, but what I argued for was that they needed an independent labor movement, an independent women's movement, independent environmental movement, and that would strengthen China. And there was some sympathy for that view, which I found good. But I think that's one of the, we've talked a lot about the labor movement here today, but I think we need to extend that more broadly to all the possible social movements that should and can exist within China. Just not labor, but these other areas of civil society also that need to bloom. And I'm wondering, because I'm not sure, but I had the impression that there was more room and flexibility under Hu Jintao than Xi Jinping. I'm not sure, but it seemed that there was a little more room. And I remember at Tsinghua University, I was taken down, before I talked to classes there, I went down a hall and there were portraits of all these communist leaders. And I was really surprised to see Liu Shaoqi and Lin Biao portraits up on the wall. I thought, wow, what's going on here? That's really different in terms of the openness about the history, But all that seemed to sort of get a lot more narrow over the last 10 or so years, which I think is a shame.
Would any other panelists like to respond? Okay, then we will take one last question do you still have your question?
Yes.
And this will also function as closing remarks for the panelists. So, yes, final question.
Okay. Mr. Thompson, you keep talking about the fruits of 1949. Could you tell us what fruits have been preserved from 1949 until this year, 2025?
Yes, I would say the collectivized, the state-owned enterprises, the collectivized parts of the economy would be what genuinely we're talking about. We're talking about the gains of 1949. The fact that a capitalist class does not rule in China. There is a capitalist class, it doesn't have political power. And the fact that there is a capitalist class without political power puts everything in danger. The fact that China is not divided up into a million imperialist-dominated areas is a gain of the 1949 revolution. And there have been major strides because of what they had, because of the proletarian property forms in China, which allowed China to develop in a way that other countries in the area and the rest of the world were not able to do. And so I think that is what is important to defend and to deepen and to expand across the economy. I think that is that's core to it. That was a progressive development. And so that's what I would say.
All right. Closing remarks from the panelists, or would you like to respond to the question? Mr. John?
No, they can stop.
Mr. Iosbaker?
So I just want to say, number one, I'm waiting for the self-criticism. Number two, this has been an interesting discussion, and really, it's hard to overstate the importance that China has for revolutionaries around the world. In the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a series of conferences held by communist parties, and the communist movement, largely collapsed internationally after the fall of the Soviet Union, because it was unexpected. Like, nobody really had a theory about what caused that. It's an interesting thing. Like, of all the new communists that emerged in the former Soviet Union, none of them embraced Mao's assessment of the restoration of capitalism in the Soviet Union. None of them. So, like, it took a decade or so for the communist movement to regroup and figure out a way forward. And Freedom Road was part of a lot of those discussions. We were a tiny organization. We're still a small organization, but the fundamental contradictions in this society are still driving forward the class struggle. Number one, workers in this country are exploited. Number two, there are oppressed nations within the boundaries of the United States. There is a black liberation movement, there is a Chicano liberation movement, and these great movements need to come together. And finally, what is really missing in this country, and people talked about it a little bit earlier, is an actual communist party that can lead the struggle of the people here. The actual class struggle, the actual national liberation struggles, and the struggle, this is the final point, we live in the belly of the beast. And international solidarity and opposition to US imperialism is one of the fundamental characteristics of any revolutionary movement here. The Freedom Road led the protests at the Democratic National Convention to condemn them for their role in the genocide. And we are now standing in solidarity with China in opposing the US preparation for war on China. So that these are hallmarks of any revolutionary in this country. And if you're interested in being part of the revolutionary movement here, you can talk to myself, Comrade Gio, who came up from UIC. We have some literature outside. You can go to our website, frso.org. Thank you.
Mr. Harris, Mr. Zhang.
Well, I consider myself a friend of the Chinese people, and I think, therefore, it's important to oppose any war upon China, as I would oppose a war against Venezuela, or, for that matter, the Russian war on the Ukraine. I think there's a lot of, obviously, class struggle and contradiction within China. How could it not be, with over 1.3 billion people, and a party of 95 million people? So it's complex, but some things are clear. The working class is struggling to have greater power, and I think that's a struggle we should support, need to support. But I would also like just to remind folks that the Chinese society, in having developed the most important sustainable technology in the world, that's really a major step forward for everybody in the world. The effort on solar power, wind power, EV cars, batteries, that's essential to human future. And if you compare, and the Chinese leadership, for all the criticisms people have, understood that 15 or 20 years ago, right? That's when they started to move on this. And if you compare that to what Trump and the Republican Party is doing, promoting coal and fossil fuel, destroying our scientific base, attacking our universities, undermining our healthcare system, it's insane. So I think we need to keep that aspect in mind also, as well as all the criticisms that people have been making from their own experiences. I'm sure the experiences of your families and friends, which are essential to listen to and take account for. Thank you.
I guess going back to the initial question about what fruits of the revolution have been preserved, I think the most meaningful fruit that has been preserved is the legitimacy of the Marxist discourse, basically, right? Like regardless of what kind of a dramatic transformation that have happened in Chinese society, right? There is still this sense that the Marxist theory and discourse is officially legitimate, right? And that's part of the mandatory education. Like you have to take these political classes in high school and in college to learn about the Marxian theory, although in a very distorted form, of course. And also, you know, like when people were taking those classes, they were kind of like reciting things mindlessly in order to get good grades on their exams, right? But then at some point, right, at some point after they graduate from college, when they start to work on a real job, right, when they feel so pissed off by their bosses, then suddenly they remember what they learned about surplus value back in high school. Right? And that became a critical source of inspiration. Basically, like workers were turning what the party state official education system was throwing at them, then turn that around to develop a more critical perspective on their bosses, on the economy, on the Chinese society as a whole. So I do believe that there's still, right, as long as the Chinese official education, official discourse is still clinging on to that, then I think there is, like, right, the Chinese working class does possess this very critical advantage. And, you know, like, of course, we have seen that basically after 2015, the room for all sorts of independent organizing across Chinese society has been much, much, much tightened, so you're right. But then there is this sense that, again, it seems like just among the Chinese youth and young generation of workers, there seems to be more and more of this spontaneous anti-capital sentiment, right? People are, among the young generation, people are more interested in learning about Marxism, right? People are more interested in learning about the Cultural Revolution, in reading Maoist literature, because that's the legacy, right? That's the available legacy they can draw upon to develop a more critical perspective and also to develop a better understanding of the power they have as workers. So I think in that, we still have hope. So I will end here. But I do want to make a suggestion to pledges, like, please, when you put on panels like that, be more aware of gender and racial balances, please. Because this is kind of problematic, to be honest.
Please give our speakers a warm round of applause. Okay, you go.
Thank you. I know. Well, I will say, just in response to the comrades, the first comrade's statement that, you know, it took like 10 years to figure out what happened after the Soviet Union collapsed. I kind of find that funny since Trotsky sort of had it figured out like 80 years before. But in terms of the general trend and how things would develop. On the other hand, it's not as if the lessons were actually learned from from what happened with the counter-revolution in the Soviet Union, because the left has spent the last 30 years supporting liberals in one form or another. And the liberal world order is dead. You know, like now the left is frantically trying to get the liberals to wake up and fight, to do something. But the liberals have the same fundamental class interests as does like the Trump administration in the United States. They are not going to be the people who improve the lives of workers. They're not going to be the people who liberate black people or any of the oppressed in this country. And for that, you do need a revolutionary party, and there needs to be a struggle within the left to come to to win, to fight over program and what is necessary to go forward. Like there need to be more debates between different left organizations on what are our tasks right now and how should we go forward. And I think that's absolutely necessary. So I would also make a pitch for my organization, which is the Spartacist League. We also have a table outside. And we also have a member, if you're a student, the Spartacist Youth Club has a representative here. But we have our latest articles on China in English and in Chinese. So thank you very much.
Please give our speakers a round of applause.